thank you guys so much for having me. I do not consider myself a theologian in any sense. I usually leave that to the other people in my life. But I'm always happy to talk about my work and how it is grounded in my spiritual experiences. I want to take a moment and thank Dean Walker for inviting me. I'm very new to campus, and so I appreciate you considering me. I would also like to thank my dean at the law school, Dean Andrew Klein, for being in attendance to support me as well as a new faculty at the university. And it really just touched me so much to be in such a warm room, right? We are living in such cold and callous times. And just to know that there can be a body of people who are faith minded, who can come together, as I tell my parents from time to time, just to be sane, right? Just to be sane and well adjusted and hopeful in times like these. It means so much. And so, yes, I will be talking to you today about really my favorite scripture. And, in my family, we have a tradition from time to time where they will ask us our favorite scriptures. And mine, for the past decade has been Proverbs 3:27. The way that I've always said it is, do not withhold good from those who deserve it when it is in your power to act. And I first heard it when I was a really young person. My brothers and I, we used to watch this Big Ideas, if y'all remember Big Idea Productions, like whether that was like you knew them through VeggieTales or some of their other properties. There was one of their shows called 321 Penguins, and it was about these kids. Oh, we have a witness. We do. We're in alignment. Yes, so it was about these children who were visiting their grandmothers for the summer, and they would be transported into space playing with these little toy penguins. It was a crazy show. There was nothing about it that made sense. But in an episode that was about helping people in need, this was the verse that they used to ground the episode. Do not withhold good from those who deserve it when it is in your power to act. And as a child, I didn't really, it didn't resonate with me. It wasn't a scripture that I heard before. It wasn't something that pastors preached on often. You always have like, the big verses, like, the John 3:16, right? Like passages about faith, about love, but no one ever talked about it. And so it was a scripture that, kind of left my mind for a while. And I just thought like, oh, this is just entertaining programming. But as I got older, especially as I transitioned into adulthood, it really started to resonate with me. And so when my parents would ask me, what was my favorite verse, it was the one I always gave. And over time, I think my parents thought that I was giving a spiritual cop out because I just kept saying the same verse over and over and over again. And they recently asked me, is this really still your favorite verse? Like, are you just playing us, or is this really something that resonates with me? And it gave me pause because I had not thought about it in a while, really in part because it felt so natural to me. And there was, as I reflected, there were some quite simple reasons that it still sat with me. One of which was that it was simple, right? Like it was very clear about what it told you to do. But it was also uncharacteristically honest, right? You can't really flip that into something else. There's something very specific that you're supposed to be doing for other people. And it gave us a clear directive on how to treat others. And that's why for the past 10 years of my life, this has always been a grounding principle with me. 10 years ago was really when I decided I wanted my work to help other people. It was my senior year at Oakwood University, a historically Black college and university. And it was a place where I learned that I really did want to go to law school. I had peers that wanted to go to law school, and I felt like I had a nice cohort of people that I agreed with, and we were all like-minded. But it didn't feel like enough, right? Like a lot of my friends, they wanted to be litigators, they wanted to be in front of courts, or they wanted to go work in what we call in the field big law, right? They wanted to work for a big law firm, work those hours, and that was something that really resonated with them. And it just didn't quite feel like enough for me. I didn't really see myself as a litigator, and I definitely didn't see myself, working like, in corporate structures of law. But I was thirsty for touching people more directly. And the beauty of being at a HBCU is that they instill in you values of humility and service, very similar to what we talk about at Wake, right? Like, those grounding values of how do we reach out and touch the community. And I was fresh off of an internship in healthcare as well. And I was like, okay, how do I bring, my passion for law and justice together with what I've seen in the healthcare space? And it occurred to me that I wanted to do both. I wanted to know the law, but I also wanted to be grounded in the ethics of care. And I also knew that in my own community, that people were struggling to trust their healthcare providers. And ironically, so I grew up in the DC metropolitan area. Yes. Oh, we have so much agreement in the room. I love it. I love it. I grew up in Prince George's County, and it's an area that, if you know anything about Prince George's County, it's a pretty middle class area full of Black professionals. That is what they're known for. And it was interesting as I started to unpack some of the mistrust I saw in my community, because the folks there did not fit the stereotypical idea of what media was presenting as people who mistrust doctors, right? Like typically, the idea was it was somebody who was impoverished, right? It was somebody from the hood, quote unquote, right? As if Black people are the only ones who can live in poor neighborhoods. And there was always this discourse about lacking insurance coverage. And that was the complete opposite of the folks in my community. I went to school in Southeast DC for a long time, and so I spent a lot of time in areas where folks would consider it to be, quote unquote, the hood or impoverished or, lacking economic upper mobility. But the people in my immediate community had insurance, right? They weren't even publicly insured. They had private insurance. They were very familiar with doctors. Some of them were doctors themselves, and they still didn't trust them. Even the folks who went to medical school, they would not trust, the doctors that were serving them or the profession itself. And while I noticed that whether that was in public forums, online, on TV, or even in academic circles in my earliest introduction to this work, the discourse was always about income. And I was like, I don't think income is the line. Whether I was in Southeast or I was in Prince George's, the continuum of distrust was the same. And so these intersections have always interested me: race and class, politics and ethics, the secular and the spiritual. I've always enjoyed parsing through group dynamics and evaluating what is real. And understanding what is real is one of the primary ways that we help those who deserve it, right? Allowing for ourselves to embrace stereotypes and easy answers does our communities a disservice. It impairs our ability to find solutions that work for us and others. And I was determined to disrupt those narratives. And so as I completed my education, a master's, a law degree, a PhD, which was arguably way too many degrees. I spent too much time in school. Proverbs 3:27 became more real to me. I was able to identify groups that were afraid of the healthcare system, why they were, how law and politics determines how the healthcare system works, and how fear, and all types of fear, political fear, racial fear, divisive fears, and other fears, keep us from getting the system that we deserve. And so many people are deserving of better public health infrastructure, not just those who are oppressed, but even those who have gotten the best of what the healthcare system has to offer. An example, a visual that I would like to give you all is a rotting apple, right? Like, how many of you, had an apple that was kind of on the edge of being on its way out, and your parents are like, no, cut the good pieces off the apple, don't throw that away, because there's still some goodness on there. And I remember when folks in my life, especially the older folks in my life who had a little bit less, they would tell me to do this with the apple. I would bite into the apple and I'm like, yeah, but this still isn't good. It's not better. Like, did we waste it? No. But is it still a shaky apple? Yes. I was like, I would like a better apple, right? Because even the best of a rotting apple is not good, right? We deserve more. We deserve better. And so my work tries to understand, how did we get there? And so the way that I explore that is, one, I study historical harms and how that impairs how Black Americans engage in the healthcare system in functional ways. But I also study how those harms are utilized in politics to galvanize racial resentment and to ultimately mask how the system is hurting everyone, and how these narratives are used to convince other people that healthcare politics are a zero-sum game, that the social safety net is a zero-sum game. And then, as of more recently, I've also started studying how the market has commodified these harms. And that's through a number of different forms. So whether that's through technology on social media, through political messaging, and through other mediums. Because the reality is, and we don't talk about it enough, fear, pain, and harm is lucrative. It draws people in, it keeps us scrolling, it keeps us engaged. But at the end of the day, all of these things are tactics that are driven in the market by similar fears and harms that impact everyone else. And in the midst of all of these very difficult times and truths that we are making peace with, knowing this also makes us stronger. Again, going back to the verse that I started with, that is the beauty of this verse, right? When we think about it, do not withhold good from those who deserve it when it is in your power to act. It ends on a directive, right? It tells us that we can do something. And in times where things feel very powerless, that we can't reach people, that our voices are not loud enough, that there are not enough opportunities for change, we realize that we can do something for people who lack the good. We can take it upon ourselves to act. We can choose to be generous. We can choose to not withhold from others. I often tell my students that my classes are not a guilt trip, right? I tend to teach classes that have very, very difficult topics. I see a lot of performative energy from all of my students who come to the class expecting to feel bad about themselves and use that guilt to, put it on other people as they leave the course. And I try to tell my students, guilt is for your parents, right? I am your professor. I have a different job, right? My job is not to raise you, it's to teach you how to think. And uncomfortable truths are designed to make us think about how to rise above them. And in my work, there are no true villains, right? It's not just one group of people that gets to wear the Darth Vader cape and the helmet and the moniker. There's so many different factors that inform the forces that ultimately lead us to the outcomes we don't want, whether that's poor infrastructure, manufactured scarcity, irrational fears of others, and poor market incentives that have brought us to these places. And ultimately, it will take work, real work, right? Not fast work, not the most appealing work. It will take substantial unseen work and diligent work to get us out of these circumstances. Because ultimately, we do decide the world that we live in. No one else does. Being at Wake Forest is a privilege, and not only because of the values of the institutions, but because of the privilege it gives our students, right? All of us, can act. We can choose to use the privilege of education to help people evolve and change, and do it graciously and even gently at times. Today, Proverbs 3:27 has evolved into a part of me. It's almost like a body part at this point. It is a core value in my work. I acknowledge that I was privileged and am privileged in this life for so many reasons. My family, my community, my education, the breadth of communities I was able to engage in, getting to do what I love to do, and getting to pour into the next generation. And so that means that there are instructions that I must take on, right? To whom much is given, much is required. Many things in the Bible are very complex, but this, thankfully, for someone like myself who's not a theologian, this is clear. If you have good to give, whatever this looks like, you should feel empowered to redistribute that good to those around us. And my charge to you is to use power, opportunity, and privilege, the privilege that you have to do the same. And I hope that you will take time to do that as well. Thank you so much for having me.